I was an atheist. I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in anything beyond what I could see, touch, explain. But what happened that day, I never imagined. I couldn't have imagined. A man, with a cold look and trembling hands, approached the mosque that was in front of my workplace. The Quran was in his hands, but it wasn't reverence that he felt. He poured flammable liquid over the sacred book and with a quick movement lit a flame. Allah's words began to burn, consumed by fire. Silence took hold, but tension was in the air. Something at that moment didn't seem right, and I, skeptical and atheist, just watched, without understanding what was about to happen. But what came next was something I could never explain. Something that made everything I believe be put to the test. What I saw in that instant changed the course of my life. And if I told you that fire wasn't the greatest miracle of that afternoon, something much greater happened, something that to this day makes me question everything I knew about life and faith. I'm Adam Walker. I'm 35 years old, and I live in Oslo, Norway. Until that day, my life was guided by reason and science. I didn't believe in anything I couldn't see, touch, or explain. I was raised in an environment where God was just a distant concept, something people used to comfort weak minds. Faith? To me, it was a human invention, nothing more, and honestly, I was comfortable in my disbelief. Until that day, everything changed. Before I continue sharing my testimony, I want to know, where are you watching from? Write it in the comments. I want to see how far this story will reach. What you're about to hear still makes me question everything I once believed to be true. The idea of a personal God, of something divine, seemed like a fantasy to me, something far from any concrete reality. Islam, in particular, always felt outdated in my eyes, a religion filled with myths and unnecessary restrictions. I used to see people of faith as naive, fooled by something that couldn't possibly be real. I was happy in my disbelief, proud of my rational and skeptical view of the world. I thought I already had everything I needed to understand reality. For me, nothing else mattered beyond what could be proven. I didn't see the need to question, to search for something beyond what I already knew. But that day, that moment, changed everything. I didn't know yet, but the truth was about to find me in a way I could never predict. That was something I never imagined witnessing. I was on the street, right next to the mosque, without much to do, just observing people's movement. The day was cold and grey, the typical Oslo afternoon, when I saw that man approach the mosque entrance. His eyes weren't at peace. There was coldness in them, silent rage. He carried the Quran, but he didn't hold it with reverence, not with respect. He held it with contempt, as if that book were a burden he didn't want to carry. The whole scene seemed strange to me, but nothing could prepare me for what would happen next. He stopped in front of the mosque at the door, where every day faithful prostrated in worship. The street's silence seemed to weigh, as if the world itself was waiting for something. I saw then when he began to pour the flammable liquid over the Quran, slowly and calculated, as if it was something meticulously planned. There were no screams, no words, just the sound of liquid falling and the distant murmur of people who were beginning to realize what was happening. He looked at the book one last time without emotion and then lit the match. The fire was fast, flames rose voraciously, devouring the Quran's pages before those people. The air suddenly became heavy, as if the atmosphere itself had transformed. The flames reflected on those shocked faces. Time seemed to have slowed down, and everyone, myself included, became paralyzed. Some looked terrified, others stepped back, but no one moved. No one knew what to do. The man seemed triumphant, but the silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't understand what was happening. For me, who had always doubted any superior force, that scene was incomprehensible. I felt something inside me, a strange sensation, growing unease. I was seeing the Quran being consumed by fire, but something wasn't right. What I didn't know at that moment, what I didn't understand, is that this was just the beginning of a change. It wasn't a simple act of desecration. It was the prelude to something much greater that was about to happen. I was still in shock, watching that man with a triumphant smile on his lips, seeing the Quran burn. For him, it was a victory. For me, it was chaos. But suddenly, something that no camera could capture happened. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't match failure. It was as if time itself had receded. The flames, previously voracious, began to extinguish themselves, as if they had been suffocated by an invisible order. I approached without realizing, as if a force pulled me against my own will. My eyes were fixed on those pages, and they wouldn't let themselves be consumed. The fire seemed to wage battle against something unseen, as if the Quran itself said, "You cannot touch me." There was no logic. It was as if the laws of nature had been suspended by a direct order from Allah. That's when the unthinkable happened. The man tried to relight the flame, but the moment he extended his hand, it was as if something struck him in the invisible. He staggered backward, brought his hands to his neck, and his eyes lost their arrogance. He began to choke. His body wavered, his face lost color, his tongue darkened before everyone. It was as if a force was suffocating him right there, not with human hands, but with Allah's justice. And no one, absolutely no one, approached, because everyone felt it. That place at that hour was no longer common ground. It was sacred territory. The street became witness, the mosque, guardian, the sky, judge. He fell to his knees on the frozen ground, hands grasping the air as if fighting against something no one could see. And before everyone's eyes he collapsed, lifeless, beside the unfinished ashes. But what really made me shudder was realizing that the fire stopped exactly where the prayer rug began. It didn't cross a centimeter, as if an invisible barrier had shouted, "Here, no." And it was in that silence, absolute, heavy, almost sacred, that my soul awakened. I was no longer before just any scene. I was before the truth, and it didn't ask for explanation. It demanded surrender. After that moment, I could no longer sleep. The scene of the fire extinguishing itself, the book intact, the man's reaction trying to relight the flames, all of this repeated in my mind like a silent nightmare. But what disturbed me most was what I had felt. It wasn't fear, it was something else, a presence, an invisible weight in the air, a certainty that grew within me, even though my mind screamed otherwise. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, that the fire failed, that the wind interfered, that my mind was exaggerating. But each explanation I gave seemed weaker than the previous one. Deep down I knew I was lying to myself, and that scared me more than anything, because if that was real, then God was real, and if God was real, what else had I been denying for years? I began searching for answers almost desperately. I downloaded the Quran digitally, started watching videos about Islam in secret, in the silence of my room, but I still resisted. Each verse I read, each saying of the Prophet I heard, made me feel something I had never felt in my life, as if I was being seen, known, called, and this left me conflicted. How could someone who denied God's existence for so long now admit that perhaps I was completely wrong? During one dawn, unable to bear that internal battle anymore, I did something I never imagined doing in my life. I knelt down. For the first time, even without knowing how to pray, I just spoke, quietly, in tears. If you exist, Mont, show me, but in a way that I can no longer escape. At that moment, I still didn't know, but that prayer, simple and broken, had just opened a door that would never close. And it was exactly then that something happened, something that no logic or science book could explain. After that dawn, when for the first time I spoke to God, even without knowing if he would hear me, something inside me broke, and at the same time, began to be born. I felt as if I was in two worlds at the same time. On the outside, I was still the same man, rational, reserved, skeptical in others' eyes. But inside, a silent avalanche had already begun. Each day, I remembered the scene of that man trying to burn the Quran, and even more the way he staggered as if something invisible had struck him. His eyes lost their arrogance. His body lost its strength. He fell there, right in front of the mosque, as if he had been judged right there. That wouldn't leave my mind. How to explain the fire that stopped, that man's tongue darkening, and why, among so many people there, did it affect me so much? I spent days in silence. Everything I believed was crumbling little by little. It was as if every argument I used against God was being dismantled, not by others, but by myself. And the more I tried to resist, the more I felt I was fighting against the truth. It was as if the Quran had not only resisted the fire, it had resisted for me. As if that word had been preserved also to reach me. But there was still fear. Fear of changing, fear of losing control, fear of admitting that perhaps faith wasn't an escape, but the very path I had denied out of pride. What if I was being called by Allah? What if all this was the most direct way for a creator to tell me, I was always here, you just couldn't see? These questions haunted me like shadows, but at the same time, they began to illuminate what was once darkness. I began to live in silence. On the outside, I followed my routine. Inside, it was war. Part of me still screamed that all of this was coincidence, that I was being weak. But there was another part, increasingly stronger, firmer, more alive. The voice of doubt mixed with something new, a serene certainty that I didn't know where it came from. It was as if Allah was surrounding me, not with force, but with patience. He didn't push me. He just remained, present, constant. Sometimes I would wake up at night with my heart racing, as if I had forgotten something urgent. Other times I felt peace just hearing Quran recitation in YouTube videos, even without understanding everything. How was this possible? Why did my heart react to words that my mind still didn't comprehend? It was as if my soul knew what my brain still refused to accept. I, the convinced atheist, now cried silently, hearing verses that touched me inexplicably. But pride still spoke loudly. I thought about my family, about friends, about my past, about the man I always said I was. If you accept this, everything changes. There's no going back. These phrases tormented me, and yet something inside me already knew I was no longer the same. Even without announcing it, even without understanding everything, even with fear, I no longer belonged to the world before. And it was in one of those dawns in absolute silence that I looked at the sky and without thinking said quietly, Allah, I can't fight this anymore. I don't want to run anymore. And for the first time, I felt a peace that didn't come from me, a surrender that wasn't rational. It was complete, without resistance, without plan, just faith. And at that exact moment, something changed. That morning, I woke up different. There was no more resistance, no fear, no pride. It was as if everything had emptied inside me to make room for something that until then I didn't even know existed: submission. For the first time, that word didn't seem weak to me. On the contrary, it carried a strength I had never experienced in my life. And so, in silence, with my heart racing and eyes moist, I went to the mosque. I sat in the back, without saying anything. One of the brothers noticed me and just looked at me with kindness. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't demand explanations. He just said, "You're ready, aren't you?" And I could only nod my head, struggling to hold back tears. There was nothing more to say. Words had been defeated by signs, by truth, by Allah's mercy, who surrounded me even when I denied him. And there, before people I didn't even know but who received me like a brother, I pronounced the Shahada. With a trembling voice but with a firm heart, I declared, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulallah." Those words broke the invisible chains that had bound me for years. I felt as if I had returned to my point of origin, as if I had finally found what I didn't even know I was looking for. Nothing changed on the outside, but inside, everything was remade. My eyes opened to a reality I had denied almost my entire life, and at that exact moment I knew. The truth had always been before me. I was the one who chose to ignore it, and even so, Allah sought me. He surrounded me with patience, and He rescued me without demanding anything, just that I recognize what was already evident. It was at that moment that I understood. The greatest miracle wasn't the fire that was extinguished. It was the pride that dissolved. It was the heart that finally bowed. Since the day I became Muslim, nothing has been the same. I'm not talking about external changes, and those came later. I'm talking about the silent, profound transformation that began inside me. The feeling was as if for the first time I had stopped running. All that existential anguish, all the emptiness I pretended not to feel, was filled by something that can't be explained. Peace. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, that doesn't need proof, that simply is. I began to see things differently. What once seemed small now carried meaning. Each verse of the Quran began to speak to me. It was as if the book had been written not for a crowd but directly for me. And this, for someone who lived years rejecting even God's existence, is something that bends you without breaking you. It's the type of truth that doesn't force you but convinces you, not with shouts but with mercy. Of course there were difficulties. Friends distanced themselves. Some people mocked. But strangely, this didn't shake me like before, because now I knew why I was living. For the first time I had direction. I would wake up and know who to fight for, who to live for, and where I wanted to go. It was no longer about winning debates or proving arguments. It was about pleasing Allah, and that alone was enough. Today, each prayer is a reminder of what I was and what I became. Each prostration is an answer to the arrogance that once dominated me. And every time I recite a surah, I remember the day when fire tried to destroy the Quran, but failed, because Allah's word cannot be erased, nor can the call He makes to the heart of those He wants to reach. And the greatest truth is this: the book that man tried to burn was the same one that saved me. I never thought that witnessing an act of hatred would become the beginning of my salvation. That man tried to erase the Quran with fire. But what burned that day wasn't Allah's word, it was the veil of my ignorance. The flame went out, but the light of the Quran ignited within me, and since then, I have never been the same. If you're watching this video and feel that something in your heart has been touched, don't ignore it. Sometimes Allah uses even the harshest scenes to awaken a sleeping soul. He doesn't need to shout. Sometimes He just shows and waits for you to choose. That's what He did with me. He showed me and He waited for me until I finally surrendered. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone. Maybe there's someone near you who needs to hear that the Quran isn't just a book. It's a mirror of the soul. It's a bridge to truth. Share this video in groups on social media wherever you can, not to promote me, but so this light reaches those who are still in doubt. And if you're already Muslim, strengthen your bond with the Quran. Don't wait for fire to recognize the value of revelation. And if you're still searching, know Allah sees you, and He is patient. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May Allah guide sincere hearts. Amen.